Good afternoon. This is Pastor Drew Cho from New Community Church Tokyo. Welcome and thank you for tuning in. Now we're in the Gospel of Mark. Doing the series right now. We're in chapter 7 and we're covering verses 24 through 37 today. The title of the sermon is Persistent Faith of Syrophoenician Woman. When you read through the Bible, there are times when you're raising your eyebrows because you just can't believe what you just read. You're thinking to yourself, like, did Jesus really say that? Or does it mean something else in Greek language? Mark chapter 4, verse 40, Jesus is turning to his disciples and saying, have you still no faith? Okay, it's a little bit stiff grammatically there, but in real life, Jesus is basically telling his disciple, dude, you guys have no faith. You guys have no faith in me. What's up with that? And there are many passages like this. Jesus is looking at a bunch of Jews and he's saying, your judgment day is going to look so bad. Okay, your final judgment day, it's going to look so bad to the point that it's going to look so much better for Sodom and Gomorrah on that day. Okay, what a nice thing to say to people, right? And I think a lot of people today, if they read through the gospel and really capturing everything that Jesus is saying, I think a lot of them will take offense at what Jesus had to say. Virginia Owens, who was a professor at Texas A&M, she assigned her English class students to read the Sermon on the Mount, that's Matthew chapter 5 through 7, and write an essay about it, how they felt. You have to understand, it's Texas A&M. These students grew up in the heart of Bible Belt, state of Texas. They grew up in churches, okay, hearing all about Jesus. But apparently, many of them read Sermon on the Mount for the very first time. And they were very surprised, okay? And many of them got very angry, this professor said, They read through the Sermon on the Mount and it says, if you hate someone, you committed murder in your heart. If you look at woman lustfully, you already committed adultery in your heart. Okay? If your eyes make you stumble, gouge them out. Like, serious? Okay? It's better to enter into heaven one eye than going to hell with two healthy eyes. Okay? And reading through these, students went bizarre. Okay? Who preaches like this? Okay? You're just not going to gather many congregation members today if you preach like this, right? Many of us who grew up in churches in the 20th and 21st century, we have this beautified version of Jesus. I'm talking about with no rough edges. He's so smooth. Everything he said is so beautiful, We have this beautified PG-13 version of Jesus who never says anything offensive. He always smiles. He never raises his voice. Okay? But because of that, when we actually encounter Jesus that sounds offensive, sometimes we don't know what to do with him. Professor Virginia Owens, who gave that assignment to students to read through the Sermon on the Mount, reading through all the essays, she made a comment afterwards saying, if you felt offended by Jesus, you're reading it right. Because a lot of people 2,000 years ago, when they heard Jesus for the first time, they also were offended, she says. So before we dive into today's text, I want your heart to be ready to read and understand what it really means. So from today's text, we're going to learn what the nature of real faith is. What should be our heart's attitude towards the saving grace is. Going into the text, let me just catch up from last week. So last week we talked about purity. Jesus declaring all foods clean. And Jesus basically said, whatever goes into man does not defile him, but whatever comes out of men is what defiles him. But traditionally, Jews, because they did not associate with Gentiles or the sinners because they thought that would defile them, So Jews would not go into Gentile region as much as possible. But in today's text, I think Jesus is making a statement. He's going into the Gentile land, Gentile nation. Okay? It's like declaring, I have no problem entering into this territory. Supposedly, it's considered dirty and unclean by the Jews. So Jesus, if you look at verse 24, chapter 7, verse 24, he's in the region of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon, okay? Tyre is a port city, the northwest from Israel, okay? It's a modern-day Lebanon. That region was known as Phoenicia back in the days, and they worship the idol called Baal. In the Old Testament, this is where Jezebel comes from. Jezebel, one of the most wicked queens of Israel, wife of King Ahab, and Tyre is where she comes from. Okay? Before Jesus arrives 2,000 years ago, during the Maccabean period, Tyre always fought against Israel, so they didn't get along back then. Josephus in the 1st century would call Tyre notorious enemy of Israel. And looking at the modern day history, 2006, there was a war between Israel and Lebanon. They fought against each other, killing roughly about 3,000 people as a result of this war. So, long time ago, even up to this day, these two nations do not get along with one another. But in today's text, Jesus is there mainly to take a break. If you look at verse 24, he entered a house and did not want anyone to know yet, but he could not be hidden. So Jesus is probably tired from, having to minister to so many people, all these people coming to him, looking for healing and all the miracles. And Jesus goes over to take a break in Tyre, region of Tyre. But the rest doesn't last long. Here comes a woman, verse 25 and 26. But immediately a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. So Mark is emphasizing here that this woman is a Gentile woman, who was considered defiled by the Jews, all right? So on top of that, her daughter is demon-possessed. So at this point, if she's coming into the house of Jewish persons, she's going to defile this place. And yet, she's visiting Jesus. The same episode is mentioned in Matthew chapter 15. And Matthew chapter 15 actually provides more details about this story. Matthew 15, 22 through 23 says, "And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, 'Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon.' But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, 'Send her away, for she's crying out after us.'" So if you look at what's happening here, this lady has prior knowledge about Jesus. So she knows him as more than a miracle worker. He's the Jewish Messiah that was promised. So she calls him Son of David. Okay? But Jesus, in response, he seems real aloof and even cold. Okay? He doesn't answer right away. And yet we know Jesus is really testing this woman's faith. Okay? And this woman is being persistent. Disciples urged Jesus to send her away, but she just wouldn't go. Okay? Maybe she loved her daughter so much she just had to go home with something. She couldn't just go home with nothing. She clings on. And looking at her, I was reminded of this passage, Matthew chapter 7, where it says, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. Okay? She's knocking, doesn't give up, very persistent. Okay? Look at verse 27. And he said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Now you read this passage right, okay? Jesus said dogs. Yeah, that's right. Now, in Japanese Bible, it's already translated small dogs. Okay, instead of dogs, it's just small dogs. So in Greek language, it does use the term referring to pet dogs instead of these wild dogs out there. Okay, and yet it still is offensive, right? Calling someone a dog. Here's the meaning of verse 27. When Jesus said children, children are, this is Israel, okay? Jews by birth. So Jesus is basically saying, primarily I'm here to preach the gospel to the Jews. Yes, eventually the gospel will go out to the Gentiles, but not until Israel is fed. Okay? And dogs, this term is referring to the Gentiles, okay? Now, I know in the 21st century, we have a great love for dogs, pet dogs. Many people consider dogs to be part of their family, but that wasn't the case 2,000 years ago. That certainly wasn't the case in the biblical culture, okay? Exodus 22:31, it says, if you have dirty meat, give it to the dogs. Dogs are dirty, give it to them, okay? 1 Samuel, Goliath is looking at David because David is coming out with a stick and he says, who am I? Am I a dog? Okay, and it's an insult to consider somebody a dog. Okay, 2 Samuel, there's a swear word saying, you're like a dead dog. Okay, not a nice thing to say to others. So calling someone a dog was a derogatory term. Okay. Jews in the first century call Gentiles dogs, and this was pretty widely known. Even Gentiles knew about this. That's why they hated the Jews. Okay, so this woman actually understands what's going on in this conversation. She understands what Jesus just said. So in verse 28, but she answered him, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And my parents used to own a small dog, Shih Tzu. Very pretty, very cute, okay? And I remember whenever I was back home for vacation, whenever we eat, the dog will come sit underneath us, okay? And oftentimes, the dog will bark at us, okay? Because he wanted food just like us whenever we're eating. It was a lovely dog, but we can't just like have him sit right next to us and eat together as a family on a table. Okay, he's a dog after all. He's not that clean. He has a virus that we can catch. So he's underneath the table. But whenever things fall from the table, he would jump right on. So he would jump right on and start eating. And that's how it was for dogs throughout men's history, okay? They would eat from the crumbs that fall from the table. So understand what this woman is saying here, okay? Dogs cannot eat directly from the table, but dogs still get to eat the breadcrumbs that fall underneath, don't they? And what is she saying here? What is she saying? Here's what she's saying. Whatever crumbs you got, I'll take them. That's what she's saying. Whatever leftover crumbs you got, I'll take them. So, listening to her, Jesus is very impressed. Okay? In Matthew chapter 15, Jesus turns to her and says, "O woman, great is your faith." Great is your faith. Now put yourself in her shoe, okay? Just think about it. Your daughter is possessed by the demon. You go to Jesus asking for help. And at first, you're ignored. Okay? Jesus doesn't seem to care about you. Disciples like, hey, please go home. He's not interested in helping you out. And you're told, when you ask, you continue to urge, and you're told, we can't feed the dogs first. We need to feed our children first, is what you're told. Okay? Now think about it. At this point, most of us, including me, most of us would have turned back and probably left that place, right? Feeling scarred. Can't believe Jesus said that to me, right? Am I a dog? You would have responded. But this woman, not only she's so sophisticated, understood what Jesus was saying, she takes on the challenge and then continues to seek grace. That's what's amazing about this woman, okay? She says, give me the leftovers. I'll take the leftover crumbs. Did you see her humble and yet bold faith? Pastor Ligon Duncan shared this illustration from his sermon. Some American Anglican pastors wanted to start up Bible-believing churches in America. In order to do that, I guess in their hierarchical structure, you have to go to one of the archbishops and then ask for permission. And this particular archbishop they need permission from was from Rwanda in Africa. And his name is Archbishop Kolini. So these American pastors, they flew into Rwanda, but instead of meeting Archbishop Kolini right away, Pastor Kolini sent one of his representatives to meet them. And for 2 days, this representative showed these American pastors around Rwanda where genocide took place back in 1994. So pastors will go around. This is a historical site where all these people were killed. And on the third day, they finally got to meet Archbishop Kolini. And Archbishop Kolini comes up and he says to them, when genocide started, we reached out to United Nations and no help came. Then we reached out to your country, America, and no help came. Then we reached out to American churches. Then no help came. And he went on to say, I understand that you're here today to ask for my help. Is that correct? And an American pastor just stood there trembling. And they said, yes, your grace. Yes, your grace. And Archbishop Kolini says, of course, I will give it to you. The help that you need, I will give to you. You didn't come to help us when we needed it. You come here for my help now, and I will give it to you. Now you have to understand this woman coming to Jesus. This woman knows that she has no grounds to expect any help from Jesus. Okay? She's not part of Israel. She's not part of the promise. She's not part of the covenant. And she knows that. She's basically saying through her confession, I am the daughter of Tyre that killed and fought Israel. Okay? I once was dead in trespasses, obeyed the spirit of this age. I was a child of disobedience. I deserve God's wrath. And here I am. I have nothing to deserve your blessing. But if you have anything left for a Gentile like me, any leftover will be good for me. That's going to be enough for me. That's what she's asking here. Okay? Some people call her, she's a female version of Jacob. Just clinging on to God. God, I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. Christian faith is not give me what I deserve. Okay? It's not. Rather, it is, if I look at my life, look at all my past, or if I look at my heart's disposition right now, I do not qualify to receive your grace. Okay? Even if I get nothing from you, I can't complain. but not because of my merit, but because you're gracious and merciful. Please give me your grace according to your will. That's Christian faith. Again, that's the kind of faith that's displayed in today's text. It's very humble and yet shameless at the same time. One pastor calls this rightless assertiveness. Very assertive, and yet doesn't really appeal to one's right. R.C. Sproul says, no sinner has a right to say with impunity, God, you owe me grace. Okay, if you ever think that, you may not even be a Christian. If you ever say, God, you owe me grace, we can never say that to God. There's a Korean movie that's called Miryang. A woman in the movie loses her husband to accident, and then her son gets kidnapped, gets killed. Out of desperation, she goes to church. Supposedly she gets saved, okay? But when her life doesn't go the way she desires, she gets really mad at God. Even after coming to faith, God, you're not listening to my prayer. And she turns to God and basically says, how dare you? How dare you turn my life like this? Recently, I know a woman who used to go to church faithfully, and 2 years ago, she was planning her big wedding. And due to COVID-19, that big wedding turned out to be a small ceremony, and she was devastated. And she turned to God and said, you know what? How dare you do this to me? Now, if you think Christian faith is all about give and take, you're going to feel the same way. But Christian faith is really God giving His mercy and grace unconditionally, not because of what we have done, but it's because He's gracious and merciful. Okay? Look at this Gentile woman's faith. Whatever is left, I'm happy with that, and I'll be satisfied with it. Just give me whatever is left. That's fine. Well, let me ask you a question. As a Gentile yourself, I'm a Gentile. Most likely you're a Gentile, okay? What kind of faith do you have right now? Now, this is the story that fulfills the prophecies in the Old Testament. Psalm 87:4 says, among those who know me, I mentioned Rahab. Rahab was referring to Egypt and Babylon. Behold, Philistia and Tyre with Cush. So these nations, Gentile nations, will eventually come to know me, says God. And this is coming true in today's text through this Syrophoenician woman. And that's very interesting. If you look at country Lebanon today, 1/3 of the country is known to be Christian. And Lebanon is the only country in the Middle East with such high percentage of Christians in the nation. So God has done something special. Maybe it started with this woman 2,000 years ago. Verse 30, let's go on. And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. Praise God. And verse 31. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of Decapolis. So Jesus is going further up from Tyre. He goes up to, along the shore, goes up to Sidon, and then back to Galilee, okay, to Decapolis. And their people bring him a deaf man with speech impediment. And this story, later we're going to see that, displays the love of Christ. But getting the bigger picture now, once again, just capturing the theological significance of what's taking place in today's text. Again, this is a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. Okay, in Isaiah, book of Isaiah, first half of book of Isaiah is all about like judgment. Okay, Israel, Judah, you guys sinned against God, and God's going to bring judgment upon you guys. And all the neighboring nations that sinned against God were disobedient. God's judgment is coming your way. And once you get to chapter 35, it slowly turns and they show the glimpse of hope and the restoration that's going to take place by God's grace. And in Isaiah 35, 2, 5, and 10, there you see all these prophecies that's going to come true in today's text. You can follow 2, 5, and 10. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon, Lebanon here, okay? Glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Verse 5, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, okay? And the ears of the deaf unstopped. So this is what's going to take place. That day when the restoration is taking place, when the Messiah is here, the eyes of the blind will be opened, ears of the deaf unstopped. Verse 10, it says, and the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So this trip Jesus is taking right now, going to Tyre, Sidon, coming back to Decapolis, okay, is really fulfilling the prophecies that was told in the book of Isaiah. And the salvation has come to these regions, and the miracles are proving that. Verse 33, and taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. So you notice Jesus here, he's taking this man aside privately in order to heal him. So Jesus doesn't want to do this in public. He does this privately. Now, this is the softer side, a loving part that Jesus is really showing to this man. Now, if this man was born like this, couldn't hear, couldn't speak, most likely growing up in this region, people would have made fun of him. Okay, he probably has been a spectacle for many years. So Jesus, at this point, he doesn't want to do this in public, doesn't want to make a spectacle of this man, okay? Instead of drawing all the attention to him, takes him privately and treats him. Jesus puts his fingers into the ears of this man, and after spitting, touched this man's tongue. You see, this man cannot hear, okay? Jesus, in many occasions, he heals people with the word, okay? He just says, you're forgiven, and they were instantly healed. But here, he does all these motions, okay? Like as if he's speaking the sign language. He's communicating with this man. In verse 34, it says, and looking up to heaven, he sighed. Jesus sighed. What is this? In Greek word, is close to moan. Okay? It's sighing in pain. Jesus is feeling the pain. Okay? Jesus is feeling the pain and feeling agitation here. Jesus feels the pain of this man and identifies with this man and says, Ephata, be open. In verse 35 it says, his tongue was released. Okay? His tongue was released is the term like men coming out of prison. The tongue was released. Okay? His tongue, along with his soul, was captured, was incarcerated, was in agonizing pain and sorrow for many years, now finally set free here. Let me conclude the message. If you look at today's story, there's a Gentile woman getting blessed, and this deaf man completely healed. Okay? And we look at this and we don't see any cost in these salvations. Okay? We just see God is so powerful. He's so glorious that he can just easily perform these miracles and bring salvation to these people. That's what we think, right? But we see, towards the end we see Jesus breathing hard and he's sighing before he heals this man. What does that tell you? Jesus was obviously disturbed and feeling the pain. Here's what the Bible says. When Jesus hung on the cross, he took our impurities and sins upon himself. On the cross, the true child of God abandoned, cast away from the table without a crumb, so that those of us who are not even children of God could be brought into God's family. Okay, let me repeat again. The true child had to become a dog on the cross so that we could become sons and daughters at the table in the heavenly feast of God. Jesus went to the cross muted in silence. He did not resist so that our tongues can be loose to give God our praise. Because of Jesus' pain, we are given freedom and salvation in God's grace. Here's a gospel application. The final verse today, verse 37. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. He has done all things well. Echoing the creation account where God created everything and it said everything was well. Jesus is here restoring people, and it says he has done all things well. Jim Boyce was a pastor of 10th Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. When he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, a doctor told him that he had 6 more months to live. So everyone around him felt so bad, sad for him. But he turned to them and said, it's all right. He does all things well. God does all things well. It's all right. If you accept the salvation of Jesus Christ, if you know you will be brought to the table of God, the great feast is waiting for you. You will have faith that can overcome and withstand anything. So let us have this persistent faith that Syrophoenician woman had, continuously seeking after God's grace. Let us pray before God.